Hello, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the morning sessions and had a nice quick break. I'm Marcia Lanes, a genetic counselor and medical editor at NORD. Newborn screening is a public health program that screens newborns for certain rare disorders that can affect a child's long-term health or survival, and ensures that these babies receive treatment as early as possible to prevent serious health problems. In this session, our panelists will explain the benefits and limitations of newborn screening programs in the United States and discuss how rare disease advocates can help make it more equitable for all families. Moderating this session will be Irfan Patel, Delaware State Ambassador for the NORD Rare Action Network. And joining him on stage are Elisa Seeger, founder of the ALD Alliance, Alice McConnell, Rare Community Member and CEO of Speragen, Incorporated, and Mike Hugh, co-founder of Project Guardian. Thanks so much for joining us today, and Irfan, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Marcia. Good morning, everyone. Almost good afternoon. So welcome and thank you for joining this breakout session on newborn screening. As Marcia said, my name is Irfan Patel. I am In addition to being the state ambassador for RAN Network of Delaware, I am also a caregiver and a patient myself. So today we have amongst us a distinguished group of panelists, and we're going to dwell into some of the challenges and roadblocks in the current newborn screening framework, and we'll also look at some of the opportunities on how to augment those challenges with the help of all of you here, right? All the caregivers and advocates for rare disorders. Before I turn it over to the speakers for a brief introduction, newborn screening is very near and dear to my heart. So 2 of my 4 children were diagnosed with a rare metabolic condition called methylmalonic acidemia, MMA for short. And when my eldest son, when he was diagnosed, this condition was not detected as part of the newborn screening. We live in Delaware, and MMA was not part of the newborn screening panel of Delaware. As a result, when he was 9 months of age, he had to go through a serious metabolic crisis. Again, it's a long story. It happened on an overseas flight, resulting in an emergency landing. I think I need a different session for that to get into all the details. But long story short, he had to go through a near fatal experience before he was diagnosed with MMA. So this experience underscores the criticality and the importance of newborn screening in saving lives. Like I said, today we have amongst us a distinguished group of panelists who will dwell into the newborn screening framework. And with that, let me hand it over to Mike for a brief introduction.
Thank you, Irfan. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Hu. I'm a father with 2 boys who are affected by a rare genetic disease called MPS II. I'm also a researcher myself. What I have seen in my boys, where the younger one have had better outcomes both physically and developmentally, have inspired me to transition from a diagnostic test developer in the industry to a newborn screening researcher in the past few years. I'm very happy to join you in the discussion today.
Thank you, Mike. Elisa?
Hi, everyone. My name is Elisa Seeger, and I'm the founder of the ALD Alliance. I started this in late 2012 after I lost my son Aiden to ALD, or adrenal leukodystrophy. He was 6.5 years old and was perfectly fine until he started having some vision issues, which led us to the diagnosis of ALD. He was a late diagnosis and spent the last 10 months of his life living in the hospital and passed away at the age of 7. And during that time, when I was researching anything that could possibly save his life, I came across the fact there was a newborn screening test for ALD, but not one state was putting it to use. And I knew at that moment that this is what I wanted to do, because that would have meant the difference between life and death, not only for Aiden, but for thousands of boys out there. In New York, we have Aiden's Law, which was signed in 2013, we became the first state to start testing every baby born for ALD. And that's when I realized that this is not a national thing. So I started speaking in other states. And as of today, we are at 43 states that are testing for ALD. But not only that, the last several years I've been working on a federal initiative, which basically is called the Eradication of Death by Zip Code, to try to make this a more uniform process across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. Alice?
Hi, I'm Alice McConnell. I am the mother of 2 children with succinic semialdehyde dehydrogenase deficiency. My daughter was diagnosed at 2, and then my son was diagnosed shortly thereafter. They're less than 2 years apart. Prior to them being diagnosed, I'm a civil engineer, and so I knew nothing about the world of rare disease. I founded a company, Speragen, and we're developing the first-in-class treatment for their disorder. But the hardest part in this whole process was going through the diagnostic odyssey, learning about newborn screening and that there was no test for their disorder. That set us on a mission to go ahead and develop the assay to screen for their test. And with that, we were able to multiplex 21 other disorders that aren't currently screened for onto our assay. And so we're a little bit earlier in the process. We're about to start the piloting of this megaplex assay, and hopefully we'll be able to help a lot more people besides just our disorder.
Thank you, Alice. So before we start, what we'll do is, again, there are a lot of new family members here who are new to newborn screening. So to make the discussion go smoother and also make it more meaningful, we're going to go through some of the basic definitions that will be used in the context for the next 45 minutes. So with that, I think, Alice, you have a couple of slides that you would like to go over in terms of some terms and terminology.
So my mic is, here we go. 99% of babies in America are screened at birth. It's the most far-reaching program in the country. More babies will be screened than will be vaccinated, attend public schools, or one day even pay taxes. We normally think of newborn screening just as that heel prick blood test, but there's 3 components to it. There's also a hearing test and a pulse ox to test for heart conditions. On that blood test, the RUSP, it's the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel. They currently have 35 conditions that have actionable treatments, and then 26 secondary conditions. Those are conditions that can be picked up with the core 35 conditions, and some states report them or don't report them, depending on the state. It's an amazing program. Like, it saves so many lives, but there are some drawbacks to it also. So less than 1% of disorders are currently included on newborn screening panels. We're still losing about 10,000 babies a year under the age of 5 to disorders. And over 150,000 children a year are being pushed into the diagnostic odyssey because their conditions aren't screened for. I really like that the entire newborn screening program was started by Dr. Guthrie. He was a father of a son that was born with intellectual disability and developmental delays, and he became a worldwide advocate for those with developmental disabilities. One of his colleagues, 10 years after his son was born, asked him to develop a test for phenylketonuria. He was both an MD and PhD, and he developed a test for it. He let the test out, and then he went back to advocating for people with developmental disabilities. And then shortly thereafter, the universe pulled him back in to newborn screening. His niece was diagnosed with PKU, but unfortunately for her, it was too late and the damage had been done. That set him on a course to become the first advocate for newborn screening. He traveled the country state by state, trying to get each state to screen for PKU.
As Alice mentioned, we're so grateful to Dr. Guthrie for creating this system, which has saved thousands of babies. But just to bring it a little bit more into the present, just a brief history. In 2002, there were 29 core conditions and 25 secondary conditions that were approved by the American College of Medical Genetics. So these conditions were reviewed and were felt to be that the states can test for them and that they were treatment methods. In 2003, the federal government had the Secretary's Advisory Committee established, which was a committee put into place that could review conditions. So there was a body that would be responsible for looking at these rare conditions and making sure that they were viable to move forward. At that point in time, there was only, majority of states only screened for 6 disorders. And then in 2008, the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act was created in Congress. And what that legislation meant is that there would be funding that went to research, to pilot programs, and to help states with implementation. Because funding is really the #1 reason why states cannot move forward with a condition. In 2010, the RUSP was established. That is the Recommended Uniform Screening Panel. So again, this federal committee will review conditions and then decide which conditions fit the criteria to be added to a state panel. But again, the problem with that, it is a recommendation and it is not a mandate, meaning that the states can move forward or not move forward. In 2011, there was 26 disorders that were screened for in every state, which is amazing progress if we looked from the time in 2003. So in just 8 years, we were able to move forward with 26 disorders. In 2019, unfortunately, the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act expired, and that primarily had to do with opt-in, which is still stalled in Congress right now. And as of today, 2024, there is actually not one state that is screening for all 35 RUSP conditions. And then this is just a basic timeline of the Secretary's Advisory Committee. And you can see how slow the process is just from this timeline. There was one condition that was added in 2010, one in 2015, two in 2016, and then one in 2018. So it's, even with all of these things the government has created, it's still a very, very slow process.
Thank you both. As you see, we have come a long way in the newborn screening framework, but there's still a lot of opportunities that we need to address. So with that, so Mike, can you elaborate on how does newborn screening, right, contributes to early detection and intervention for genetic and metabolic and congenital disorders, right? And while you are at it, can you also explain the difference between screening and the diagnostic framework?
Yes, so I think the answer might be different to any one of us when you're asked the question, what is the #1 issue that the rare disease community is facing? To me, that answer is we don't have treatments. We don't have arguably 5% of the diseases that are treatable, and many of those treatments are mitigations, if you will. There's no cure for any of those diseases, right? And so for the 95% plus of the diseases with no treatment, they fall into a very big chicken and egg problem, which is if you don't have treatments, you cannot start the screening, because for any disease to be screened, you need to have a treatment. But if you don't screen, one of the critical issues in developing treatment cannot be solved. And that is, rare disease trials are hard enough, right? Because you don't have a lot of patients to go to. And on top of that, the pharmaceutical companies, any developers coming into the field can only recruit patients that are highly symptomatic. I have heard an analogy that I want to use here. It is like you have a bathtub in your house on the second floor that is overflowing. It's been overflowing for 6 years, right? When you're presented with that patient. Everything in your house is soaked in water, right? So the treatment the modality of most treatment is, okay, I will allow you to go to the faucet and turn it down, not even turn it off, right? That's the state of therapy for many of the diseases we have. Some of them go further. They can close the faucet completely. Some of them go one more step. We can unplug the bathtub so the water within the bathtub is drained. But you still have a whole house of water mess to deal with. And that is the treatment, what the treatment cannot do for you. So now what newborn screening can do is essentially installing an alarm on your bathtub and anything that can leak water and tell you your bathtub is about to be full, please turn the faucet off, right? This makes potentially the clinical trials much more efficient and make the demonstration of efficacy much easier. If we can solve that problem, if we can get into newborn screening for many of the diseases, the treatments will come. But unfortunately, without that, we are sort of bound in this chicken and egg problem where there's no treatment, there's no screening. But there's no screening, there's no treatment. Yeah. Oh, and then getting back to your second point, in terms of this difference between screening and diagnosis, this is very much linked to the first question I just mentioned. The challenge in developing the treatments is that you are only presented with highly symptomatic patients. That is how diagnostics work, right? You have some indication in the clinic, some symptoms that alert the physicians to say, okay, I have a patient, this is not functioning properly, I need to find the answer. So you throw a whole bunch of diagnostic tests at the patient, and that's what creates the diagnostic odyssey because it's rare. The physician most likely haven't seen it before, right? Screening is very different. The fundamental difference is that you are screening in pre-symptomatic population. So out of the tens of thousands of patients that you're screening for, there are probably one or two with any particular disease, and they're pre-symptomatic. So you don't have any indication, you don't have any symptoms telling you that this might be the patient, and therefore your requirement for screening tests and diagnostic tests are vastly different. We can dive into that detail and talk about it for the entire day. But one critical fact is for screening tests, you are dealing with pre-symptomatic population, and screening positive have to be followed up with a diagnostic test before the treatment can begin.
Yeah, that's a great distinction, right? So again, I always say that even in case of where you're able to diagnose, I think early diagnosis is directly correlated to the quality of life as well, right? So yeah, that's great. So, so Elisa, as we saw, right, in the initial overview, and also I think that that's one of the objectives of the breakout session here, right, to talk about the differences and similarities in the way the states approach newborn screening, right? Can you highlight some of the key differences and commonalities, and how does that affect the rare disease community?
I think the biggest problem is that it differs greatly from state to state. I wish that there was something we could put into place and then just repeat it 50 times, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. There are some states, I think we're at 9 now, that have RUSP alignment legislation, but unfortunately even with that, if they do not have the funding to move forward, they can't. Some states do need legislation. Some states will move forward with conditions that are not on the RUSP. New York did that with a couple of different conditions. So, you know, I wish that there was a formula that we could just go from state to state, but I think just from the work that I've done and traveling to other states, the number one reason why states cannot move forward is the funding piece. And if we really understand that not only is it saving lives, which is the most important thing, but doing this testing is saving millions and millions of dollars in healthcare as well. So I don't think that was a great answer, but you know, there's not a lot of similarities there.
Yeah, again, newborn screening is such a vast topic, right? You need a full day to delve into all the details, so, but that was a great answer. So now tied to that, right, from your experiences, right, so it's going to be a round robin question. So what are some of the challenges and limitations when it comes to the current newborn screening technology as well as the methodologies? Yeah, Alice, you can go first.
We're kind of in a little special category. Our multiplex panel can start in any laboratory tomorrow. And so we've done our design that it can run on the equipment and the reagents that they already use. So that's a big part of newborn screening, is trying to get a technology that already works. But fortunately, we were able to use the equipment that's already in the laboratory. Our issue with the current newborn screening program is everything else that you have to do to get to the point of a RUSP application. And so we're a very small group. We have less than 80 patients diagnosed. It's going to cost us over $8.5 million to get everything in line before we can even get to the point of applying for the RUSP. And it's a 15 to 20-year process. And that's a huge burden to place on such a small group of people. It's a public health program, but it's the advocates and the patients and the organizations that are driving newborn screening forward. That's along with dealing with everything else that you have going on in your life, managing your rare disorder.
Anything to add, Elisa?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that Alice was saying. It's just an overwhelming burden, and as we know, the majority of these conditions are very rare. So it's very hard for the patient communities to actually come up with all of the information needed. And I think one of the things that we're trying to change is to fix how the Secretary's Advisory Committee is functioning right now. A lot of the issues is that they may relitigate what the FDA has already said is an approved treatment. That's one of the things that they should not be doing. Putting a pause on accepting nominations. The N of 1 rule, which is very frustrating because, as we know, with an incidence rate of 1 in 50,000, 1 in 100,000, 1 in 250,000, it would be years and years and probably decades before we find that one, but we know that the assay has already been established, so why do we now have this additional burden? That should be enough to say that the test works and to be able to move forward.
And if I may add, I think one of the biggest technical challenges that newborn screening programs are facing is the current workhorse, which is mass spectrometry, which works wonders in terms of what it can detect. But it has a limitation. It has to have a detectable biomarker in the blood sample that we're collecting in order to be able to detect it, in order to put it on the roadmap for a RUSP nomination, right? Anything that doesn't use mass spec is automatically doomed, because if you're introducing a new technology, that hurdle of introducing the initial platform is a no-no basically for any public health labs. And it is resource related. If we have infinite amount of resources, of course we can do whatever we want, but it is very tight in those public health labs. And therefore, we are essentially strapped in the boundaries of the current technology and cannot go beyond that. There are research going on right now in terms of trying to introduce new platforms, technologies, but they all face the same problem. How do we jump through that cost hurdle in order to get to the level of evidence that we can do the RUSP nomination?
Okay, great, yep, thank you all. So now, I know we talked about healthcare equity in few of the previous sessions, right? Now, with respect to newborn screening framework, how can the current healthcare system ensure equitable access to newborn screening regardless of their socioeconomic status or geographic locations? So, Alice?
This is one part that newborn screening is phenomenal at. 99% of children are screened, and it doesn't matter if you have the insurance or the means to pay for it. Every state has in place something that will help families so that no baby is missed in newborn screening. It's the one point of true healthcare equity in our country. If you're the wealthiest family or the poorest family within a state, you receive the same screening that that state says is on their panel. And so the problem happens is because the states screen for different things, and then some conditions aren't included on any state panels. I'm going to bring up the data just for SSADHD because I have access to it all. We're about to publish our prevalence study, and when we completed it, we were completely shocked that the highest rate of the disorder is in African heritage. Most of our patients diagnosed, and you go to one of our family meetings, anything, almost complete European descent. And you can see that the number for African ancestry is almost 3 times what it is in the other ones, but we only have 2 patients diagnosed in the US that are African American, and that's only 0.3% of what we should have. That just goes on to compound health inequities throughout the system. So the impact of the skewed diagnosis, that means people that participate in our natural history study, almost completely white. Our biorepository still samples are always from our white patients. We don't have their residual blood spots because we're not on newborn screening, so we are not able to pull them to put them into our assay. When we did our patient-focused drug development, which is now part of the drug program that FDA recommends, the voice of the patient for us was white. And so we're missing a huge section of our population because we're not on screening. And this leads that we can't develop meaningful endpoints because we don't have the voice of all of our patients. And FDA now has guidance for clinical trial diversity, but we're never going to be able to fill that clinical trial with a diverse population because they're not screened for.
Great. Anything else to add?
In my mind, I think this should be more of a national effort. We know that if, again, the federal initiative that's there, it's a recommendation, and right now it can take a decade or more before 50 states are testing for any condition, and that leads to huge inequity for families. Imagine knowing that your child would have lived or was not permanently disabled if they only lived in state X as opposed to state Y. I don't believe this is a party issue. This is something that should this is a saving lives issue, saving babies issue. So I think, we really should make this more of a national effort and cut down that time, and we will save thousands of lives by doing that.
And if I can add, I think when we consider the equity issues that newborn screening programs face, we should first recognize that newborn screening is only a part of the system of the medical care. And in terms of the delivery of newborn screening, in many ways, it is more equitable than some of the other deliveries. At least 99% of the babies are screened for different diseases, but they're all screened. But the challenge is the downstream that are exposed, the downstream inequities that are exposed by the screening is what the program is facing right now. In terms of follow-up, in terms of the insurance coverage for treatments, the inequitable deliveries of care between big cities versus rural areas. All of those are issues that we're facing, but I do think we should recognize that newborn screening alone is not going to be able to address all of that. So it's a systematic effort that we need to engage in. The other thing I wanted to mention is what Alice has shown earlier. You have seen the incidence rate data or the prevalence data for the disease. What you saw is in African American, the incidence rate, the prevalence is higher, but there are only a few data points in there. That is the one kind of inequity that we're facing in many aspects. In my area, which is genomics, what we know is the genomic databases we have are predominantly populated by people with European ancestry. So when you have a genome sequencing data coming back, the chances that the genome can help you diagnose a patient is much higher when you have a patient with European ancestry compared to other races, and therefore the inequity in the diagnostic value that any of these technologies can deliver to you can be inequitable. And so it's a multifaceted problem that we're facing, and we need to address all of them, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. I think the data speaks volumes here, right? So I think we have the data right now. How can we really take actions from those insights, right? So I think, Mike, you kind of called out the systemic gap as well. So before we get to the Q&A, let's tackle this one key aspect, right? What can individual caregivers and families do to help improve the challenges and roadblocks that we see in the current newborn screening framework?
We've heard it throughout the day. Tell your story from when we kicked off this morning, and I had to excuse myself from the room because it was so incredibly moving. Tell your story. If you could have been diagnosed through newborn screening, tell your OB, tell your pediatrician, tell your children's teachers, go to your member of Congress, tell your story. It is so powerful. Let them know the pain, the anxiety, the length of time, money it took you to get a proper diagnosis. And if you were diagnosed through newborn screening, tell your story. Tell what a great system it is and how everybody deserves access to it.
And just adding to that, going for what NORD stands for, alone we are rare, but together we are strong. If you have one of those ultra rare conditions, talk to other disease groups, try to become a community. I think if we all join together with these conditions, we can really make a difference on a national level.
And on a probably more research side, I wanted to add one point, which is in newborn screening, in new nominations for conditions, a common problem that we run into is a lack of evidence. And this can be in many different ways, but I think one prominent way that families can come in to help is talk to your attending physician, pediatrician or specialist, whomever it is. Talk to him or her about potentially documenting your family's case, your child's case as a case study. Because what we don't have a lot of the times is the recognition that so-and-so certain cases can be documented and contribute to the evidence that we need for the eventual nomination. And when you're about to nominate, that's when you find out, oh, shoot, I should have documented that, but I couldn't now go back 10 years to find all of the things. So keep that in mind, that your story matters, your case report matters. And so find a way to document that. It will be critically helpful.
Yeah, great, right? So I think storytelling is the most powerful tool, right, that we can all make use of. So again, thank you all for sharing your expertise and willing to share your expertise. I think that's important. And I think, like our panelists said, right, we all have a role to play here. Now with that, let's move on to the Q&A portion of the program here from the audience.
Perfect. We do have a couple, and once again, if you have any, please raise those high so we can spot them. What are some of the ethical considerations surrounding newborn screening, particularly regarding consent, privacy, and parental autonomy? Thank you so much.
That is a very big question, and a question that the field has been grappling with, especially with the recent news where, in Michigan and New Jersey, the newborn screening samples were tapped into. I think when I think about consent, I think of it in two different ways. The first one is with the current system, which is, as you all know, it's opt-out, meaning if you don't actively opt out, you're by default in. And to opt out is one of the reasons that ensure the high screening rate of 99%. However, it does come with a drawback where the delivery of that consent, which is because you're doing opting out, in many times it is to some extent neglected, maybe the wrong word to use here, but not properly delivered to the families is what often happens. And if you ask parents 10 years from when their baby was born, most parents actually don't even recall encountering newborn screening in their hospitals. It is it is one of the worst times to approach a parent to ask about consent, right? And so I think that system itself does have a lot of room to improve. We do want to ensure we have a high screening rate, 99% or even 100%, but we don't want to do it at the cost of not getting people the information they need about what they're consenting into or what they can opt out of, so that it doesn't come back later on to haunt us. The other part of my consideration is if we stay status quo as we are right now, I think the system works wonders, right? But we have to move into the future. We have to screen more diseases. And if the way to get there, for example, if we were to introduce genome sequencing, and with all of the privacy concerns that there are about how you can use the genome data, I think we probably have to be looking at opt-in model more than what we have considered before. And I think we should embrace that opportunity and possibility. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. I think what it will give us is the true empowering of parents to be involved in newborn care. If we ask, we have done the study in New York City with over 11,000 families now enrolled. And in the process of talking to those parents of the current generation in their 20s and 30s, what we have realized is our beliefs, our literature about this particular area in terms of consent have been filled with data that are aged out. We have a current generation of parents who are, grew up in the social media age. They have a lot more exposure than what we had back then. And so in terms of understanding of a new technology like genome sequencing, understanding the implications, and willingly participating in clinical studies like this, we have achieved a lot higher enrollment rate than what we initially believed we could. And so I think it's definitely worth the reconsideration. If opt-in is what we have to go there, do we need to be so afraid to go there?
Elisa?
I think there's a general misconception by just parents out there, and I think if they really understood that they would be okay with this, all of the blood spots that are kept are de-identified. So just as an example, when we were testing ALD before it was added to the New York State panel, I gave permission for New York State to use my son's blood spot in order to validate the test. There was 9 other families that did the same thing. So those are de-identified. If what happens with a lot of these lawsuits that are going on right now and states are forced to destroy blood spots, that really is going to ruin the newborn screening program. We won't have blood spots to pull from to validate tests. We won't be able to do research with these blood spots. So there's a lot of issues. And just adding to what Mike said, I really don't believe in an opt-in. Doing research on that, the cost of that annually would be about $65 million a year, where in newborn screening, we're begging for $20 million so we could have money go to the state so they can be compliant. I think people should, this country is built on freedom. I think if you as a family don't want to have your kids tested, that you should have the ability to opt out. But I think doing the opt-in model will actually be a giant disservice for families that have a language barrier, might not understand what's happening. Hey, maybe I don't want to sign an opt-in because I just had a baby and I'm exhausted and I can't read another piece of paper. So all of those issues, I think, will actually be a disservice to the newborn screening program.
Anything to add, Alice?
I truly believe it's a matter of education. And so just like any other screening program in America, Early and often education is the best that we should be able to do for people. You hear about newborn screening after you've been through labor and delivery. That's not the time, as everybody said. It's in the first trimester, or even before that. I mean, we commonly talk about our cancer screenings now and when they should begin. And if we can say colonoscopy, then we can certainly start talking about newborn screening earlier than when after labor and delivery. The more we educate people, the more they understand about it, the better the process will be. And that even goes on to when you get your results. If they're abnormal, the more that we know about it, the less we'll be scared and anxious about it.
Thank you. I think we have one question from the audience there.
We do. Thank you for all of that. How do you see AI beginning to impact newborn screening? How might it help or hurt address health inequities?
Well, I can give it a try. In our clinical study, which is based on genome sequencing, AI, or maybe in a more general sense, machine learning and deep learning, can certainly come into help, because one of our biggest hurdles is how to interpret the variants. Some of the variants are in the database, very well annotated, but there are a lot more out there that doesn't have any annotations. However, for AI or any algorithm to come in to help, because genomic space is a huge space, it has a lot of inputs, so what we need is a gigantic set of data to help us parse that, to make meaning of the data. So it is what we're trying to tackle with, but we also recognize the scale of data is far beyond what a single study can handle and can contribute to. So we're hoping that there will be some national level efforts to move this forward, and federal funding hopefully to move this forward.
How can interdisciplinary collaboration between healthcare professionals, policymakers, researchers, and advocacy groups enhance newborn screening programs and their outcomes?
I think that's important for all of us to work together, because we each do different things. When I started on this journey, my first call, laying in a hospital bed next to my son, was to the newborn screening lab. Make those relationships, find out what they need, and try to help them. And then as far as the doctors as well, because let's say you're a neurologist, it doesn't mean that you know about all rare conditions. Giving some input on how this information should be given to the families. I meet a lot of newborn screening families because of the work that I do, and telling a family, don't Google it, or it's on a Friday afternoon, instead of saying, hey, you should go to this website, this will give you the information that you need. So I think it's really important for all of us, industry, newborn screening programs, physicians, advocacy, to all work together, to join together and trying to make it a better journey for our rare families.
Great point. Thank you. This is our last one. It says, in my state, we have grown to 34 newborn screening disorders. What suggestions do you have for better understanding the importance of newborn screening for both parents and the states? We must bring more awareness in order to be better advocates.
I think reaching out to that newborn screening program and letting them know that you want to be involved, you want to try to help them. They're wonderful people. A lot of times their hands are tied, right? We would love to test for every condition that's out there. That's not up to them. They're being told what to do by their health programs. So work with them. They might say, can you advocate for this? Can you talk to legislators? Can we get a budget increase? Whatever that may be, I think it's really important to have those relationships.
Great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.